Good morning and welcome to this morning's ExamRevision YouTube Live for Junior Cycle Home Economics, where we'll be looking at macronutrients. So these include your protein, fats and carbohydrates. Follow us on social media. So we're on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook and then of course YouTube. Today's plan, we're going to look at the layout of the Junior Cycle Home Ec exam. We're going to look at Junior Cycle Home Ec exam tips, and we're going to look at protein, fat and carbohydrates, which are all our macronutrients. For Home Ec, it is composed of a 50% written exam and then a 50% practical exam, which will happen just after Easter this year. The layout of the Junior Cycle written Home Ec exam. So the first group to be examined will be you guys, which will be in this June due to last year's being cancelled. So we have the common level, and it's a written paper worth 320 marks for 90 minutes. So there are two sections, Section A and Section B. So Section A has 80 marks, which is composed of 10 questions at 8 marks each. We then have Section B, which is 3 questions, which altogether amounts to 240 marks. So with Section A, I would recommend spending 20 minutes in total doing these questions. So that amounts to approximately 2 minutes per question. With Section B, I would suggest spending about 60 minutes in total for the whole of Section B. So because there's 3 questions, that gives you approximately 20 minutes per question. So this is my suggested time plan that I would use for my students. I'd spend 5 minutes at the start looking over all the questions, so reading through the whole paper, and this kind of gives you an idea as to what to expect. I would spend 20 minutes doing Section A, approximately 60 minutes doing Section B, and then I'd spend about 5 minutes actually reviewing your answers. So in this YouTube Live today, we've looked at the layout of the JC Home Ec exam and we've looked at some tips. So for the next 50 minutes, we're going to be looking at protein, fat and carbohydrates. And you can find all of these on the ExamRevision website as well if you purchase the option to go into the Home Ec. And we've detailed PowerPoints, we have a resource pack, and then we have our quizzes as well. So for your exam tips, I always say read the question and highlight the key information underneath it. Then if it helps, write some notes beside the question in maybe pencil just to help you before you actually write it into the exam. So this is kind of what the sandpapers look like, and the mocks were similar, so I'd expect it to be the same. So here's a question from the sample paper. So in this question here, we have this bit here, every young child deserves to thrive. Then discusses about naming 3 nutrients that are important for a child in the first 2 to 3 years. So there's a good bit of information there. I suggest highlighting the key information, so I know I have to name 3 nutrients, but the thing is they're not just nutrients, any old nutrients, they have to be ones that suit a child from 2 to 3. So I know maybe are protein, fats and carbs. You then need 1 function for each, and you need 1 source as well. So by highlighting this, you're identifying the key information as to what should be there. So exam tips, always write in blue or black pen because otherwise it won't be picked up properly when it's been scanned. Please do not write in any fancy colours like pink or purple. Pencil should only be used for diagrams and sketches. The booklet is scanned, so don't be writing outside the boxes. There is extra paper at the back of your booklet after Section B, but just make sure if you are using that you label your answers so that it is very clear for the examiner as to where you have been writing. So for today's plan, we have looked at the layout, we've looked at our tips, and now we're looking finally now at our protein. So this is taken from the PowerPoint, which is on our ExamRevision website. So our learning intentions for this particular chapter are to understand the structure of protein, explain the functions, classify protein, list the sources of HBV and LBV protein, look at the RDA, and identify the effects of deficiency. The reason why I decided to talk about protein, fats, and carbohydrates today is because these are some of the most important chapters in the junior cycle home ec course, because they come up in every aspect of the course, so they're just really important to revise over. And it's an area which a lot of students struggle with, and find in particular students are forgetting these during their mock, so it's very good revision then. So what are nutrients? So macro comes from the Latin meaning big, whereas micro comes from the Latin meaning small or tiny. So macronutrients are protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Now you may hear me abbreviating carbohydrates to carbs. Micronutrients include our vitamins, minerals, and our water. So take a second there to have a think about what you already know about protein, because there's a good chance you already know a lot about protein and you don't even realize it. So this is a strategy that I would always use with my students, and it seems to help them a lot. Okay, so protein. This is a table that I would use when teaching all of the nutrients. So whether it's protein, fats, carbohydrate, vitamins, minerals, and water. So it generally has the same layers, but you could have to change a few little things depending on the particular nutrient. So in our ExamRevision resource pack, I have all these done out, which makes it very handy for students. I find it's also more helpful to write stuff into tables like this rather than writing little essays, because students find it easier when revising. So nutrient in this case is protein. If it was fat, you'd write down fat here. So composition is a scientific word which basically means what is something made up of. Classification is a scientific word meaning to put something into types or groups. Function always means a job. So in this case, what is this particular nutrient actually doing for my body, and what are the benefits of it? Sources will always be either a food or a drink or a selection of both. Your RDA stands for your recommended daily allowance. So this is how much of this particular nutrient do I need per day so that I can maintain my general health. Effects of deficiency. So deficiency means that you're not getting enough of a nutrient. So you need to know what's going to happen to you if you're not getting enough of a particular nutrient. Now, not all nutrients will have deficiencies, but some are more prone to it. So for our protein, it is the most important nutrient for your general health. It is composed, which is another word for meaning it is made up of, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, so CHON. So it's the only nutrient which actually contains nitrogen, which is required for growth. So you will not find nitrogen in carbohydrates or fats or any of the vitamins or minerals. So you have CHON there, so carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen together form amino acids. So amino acids are the most basic part of protein. So they make up the most basic part of it. So you can see right here that they are called amino acids, which means they are held together by what's called peptide links. So this here is one amino acid, two amino acids, and it's kind of like a glue that holds them together. And then this whole chain is what we call a polypeptide chain, and that is what makes up your protein. So next up, functions. So functions is always what it does for my body. So in this case, protein is really, really important because it is necessary for growth and repair. So if you're ever sick, you really need to take in your protein, especially after an operation, because this is what's going to help you build yourself back up and get healthier. So it is also used for the production of hormones, enzymes, and antibodies. When there is too much protein, which as in general the Irish population does tend to consume more protein than they actually need, it can be basically broken down and used as energy. So classification always means that we're putting something into groups, so 2 or more groups. So protein can be classified into high biological value proteins, abbreviated to HBV, and you will have to know this for your exam. And I put a little chicken there because this is always your animal sources. Then we have our low biological value, so that's LBV. Again, you're going to have to know what this abbreviation is, and these are always your plant sources, so we have little peas and pods there. So just to recap, protein is HBV. So as I said in the last slide, these are animal sources. So these are your meat. So it could be chicken, it could be beef, it could be turkey, any type of fish, eggs and milk. So anything that's come from an animal, so an animal product. So these would not be suitable for vegans. We then have our second classification, which is low biological value, or LBV. And this includes your peas, beans, lentils, and any type of nut. So RDA stands for recommended daily allowance. And this basically means the amount that you need every day so that you can maintain your general well-being. So it is 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. That is the general rule for protein. So say, for example, if you have someone that's 35 kilograms, they are going to need 35 grams of protein per day. Another little thing to take note of is that 1 gram of protein is actually equal to 4 kilocalories or 17 kilojoules. So deficiency, what this means is that you don't have enough of a particular nutrient. It's actually pretty rare in developed countries such as Ireland, but in third world countries where people can become malnourished, it can lead to stunted growth, especially in children. So we have just covered the first part of the macronutrients, which included our protein. Now we're going to actually have a look at fat. So our learning intentions for this particular chapter is to understand the structure of fat, just like the way we looked at the protein. We're going to look at the functions. We're going to be able to classify fat, which means to put it into groups. We're going to look at the sources, which include our saturated and unsaturated fats. And we are going to look at the RDA and look at the effects of overconsumption, and then look at how to manage dietary fat intake. And again, this can all be found on the ExamRevision website, where you'll also get the quizzes and you'll get access to the resource pack and past our sample papers for fat. So take a little moment there to think about what you actually know about fat so far. Okay, so fat. Again, I like to use the same table. We have our nutrient, in this case is fat. Composition, we know that's going to be the use of scientific terminology. We're going to look at the function, so the job or what it does for my body. We're going to look at sources, so food or drinks. RDA is our recommended daily allowance. Effects of deficiency, and in this case, there's an extra little column that we didn't have in the last one. So in fact, we have effects of overconsumption, okay? So composition or structure. So whilst this might look a bit sciencey and a bit scary, it's actually not too bad when you break it down. So fats are also known as lipids. When you want to leave insert homework, they refer to them as lipids. So if you do happen to see it come up in a question as lipids, they're just talking about fat. But in general, they're just going to call it fat. So fat is made up of 3 elements. So in this case, it's carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. And you'll note that it doesn't have the nitrogen because only protein has that. So fat are made up of what we call glycerol. And you'll see how I represented it here in this green. And 3 fatty acids. So what happens is a glycerol bonds with 3 fatty acids, and what it makes is what looks like this molecule here, which is called a triglyceride. So a triglyceride is the most basic unit of fat. So for example, when you have a house, you have it made up of loads of walls, but if you break it down into the most individual part, you'll just have one brick. So this is the one brick in the house of fat. So our functions now is looking at what fat does for our body. So fat is necessary for the production of heat and energy. So this is where you're going to get all your energy from. It also insulates delicate organs such as the kidneys and intestines. So if you were to open up the human body and dissect it, you'll notice that there is a big amount of fat around kidneys and the intestines. So this really is to protect it so that when you get a bang or you fall, that you're not actually damaging your kidneys and intestines. Also, it keeps you warm because it's producing heat. So classification means we're putting it into 2 groups again. So in this case, we have saturated fat. So you see I've put a sad smiley face, basically to help you remember that this is the type of fat which is not good for your body in high amounts. Now we do have a good type of fat which is called unsaturated, which is good for the body, and you might have heard of your omega fatty acids, so omega-3 or omega-6 or omega-9, and these are to promote good brain health. And your unsaturated fats, they also really good at reducing cholesterol, so that means that your arteries are not being blocked basically with plaque, and so you won't have strokes and heart attacks. So just to give you now the sources of saturated, so these would be your animal sources. So again, your vegans wouldn't be eating any of these. So they're your meat, your eggs, and your dairy. Now, you'll know from learning about meat that there are different types of meat. So there's your red meats, there's your poultry. So your poultry, like your chicken, would have a lot less fat than your, say, your beef. And also you can cut it away a lot easier. So if you're going for meat, go for your low fat options. You then have your eggs, which we know have a good bit saturated fat, and then we have dairy. Now if you're having your low fat options, you're still going to have saturated fat, but it's going to be in a smaller amount. We then have unsaturated fats. So these are your plant sources, but they also include fish. So vegetarians can have these if they are including the fish, but a vegan wouldn't opt in for the oily fish. So oily fish would be like your salmon and your sardines, your vegetable oils. You could have rapeseed oil, you could have sunflower oil, and then nuts, so any type of nuts like your Brazil nuts, peanuts and almonds. So RDA stands for recommended daily allowance. So you see from this plate here that half of it, well nearly half of it, comes from your carbs. So you need to make sure that no more than 30% of your daily intake. So it's going to be the biggest amount of your plate, but you also need to make sure that you're not taking in too many carbs. So overconsumption, always means more. So if you're having too many carbs in your diet, you can actually basically cause obesity, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, which is also known as hypertension, can cause strokes and heart diseases. So whilst all fats are high in calories, so it doesn't matter if they are saturated or unsaturated, they all have kilocalories, but the unsaturated, which are your fish and veggie sources, are always a lot healthier. So how can I manage fat intake? So this is a slide that the SEC would like to use a lot for in the papers. So I've seen it come up in the sample papers a good bit, and it also links in with CBA2 at the moment, but they do love asking questions like this, and it links into your healthy your meal planning and looking at the food permit. So managing fat intake, you should limit high fat foods to 1 to 2 times a week. So you're always thinking back to the food permit. Use healthier cooking methods such as steaming instead of frying. So if you go onto the ExamRevision website and go to strand 1, you can look at methods of cooking, and there's more information on what steaming and frying is, but always go for steaming rather than frying. Use your low-fat options such as your low. And when you're getting those packs of butter in a cafe, when they give you two, one portion is actually one of them, so you shouldn't actually be using the two on your scones or your bread. Remove excess fat from meat, so your pork chop, trim around the fat. Check fat content on labels, so go to labels. Everything is required by law in Ireland to be labelled, and it has to have the nutritional information on it by law. So we have looked at the macronutrients, protein and fats, and now we are going to look at our carbohydrates. So to look at the our learning intentions for this one, again, you can find all this on the ExamRevision website. So we are going to look at the structure of carbohydrates. Again, this is slightly scientific, not too bad at all. Going to look at the functions, so what it does for my body. We're going to classify carbohydrates, so we know that that means put it into 2 or more groups. We're going to look at sources, so these are food or liquid sources. So there are going to be 3 types of carbohydrates which we will be focusing on. We're going to look at fiber. We're going to look at how to increase fiber consumption. We're also going to look at the effect of sugar on the diet. We're then going to look at how we can decrease our sugar consumption, because that is something which in general, as a rule of thumb, the Irish population do consume more sugar than they actually need. We're then going to look at the RDA for fibre and sugar, and then finally we're going to look at what is the difference between carbohydrate deficiency and overconsumption. So take a moment there to think about what you actually know about carbohydrates. Okay, so yet again, you'll recognize this, which is the exact same format that I would use for the fats. The only difference between this one and the protein one is that we didn't have this effects of overconsumption. So for this one, we'd write carbohydrate here. You'd write your composition, your functions, sources, RDA, and effects of deficiency. So you can write this down on a sheet and fill it in as you go, and it's a good way to test yourself as well at the end. And as I said earlier on, you can access all lovely quizzes belong to these chapters under strand 1 in the ExamRevision, and they're really handy, and I'd use them a lot with my own students, and it's just a good way to test yourself really fast. So composition, we know that this is the sciencey part, and it is about as sciencey as this chapter gets, and it's not too bad once we break it down. So our carbohydrates are only found in plants. Now you'll remember from science that photosynthesis means that our green plants basically use the sun's energy to make their own food. So our carbohydrates are made up of sugars which are joined together. They are made up of the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, hence why I have this here, CHO, and you'll know that carbohydrates and fats are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, but our protein is unique in that it has those 3 plus our nitrogen. So these elements combine to form simple sugar molecules such as glucose. So carbon plus hydrogen plus oxygen, they all bond together and they form simple sugar molecules such as glucose, which is your C6H12O6. And anyone doing science will know this because this comes up under that course as well. So when many sugar molecules join together, they form long chains of starch. So in the next slide, I have a visual representation of this. So during digestion, this starch is then broken down into individual sugar molecules. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. You have one glucose unit, which is made up of your carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen bonded together, which then forms your starch, which is held together. You see 3 starch molecules, but when your starch is broken down through digestion, so it's going through your whole alimentary canal, the bonds here are being broken, and basically your starch is being broken down into 3 individual molecules, and this is what it looks like. And that's as scientific as this particular set of this chapter gets. So hopefully this will help you to summarize that bit of information. So functions, as we know, means jobs or what it does for my body. So our carbohydrates are for the production of heat and energy, so similar function to that of our fats. Now, carbohydrates contain fiber, which we will look at now in more detail in a couple of minutes, but fiber prevents constipation and it gives you a sense of fullness. If you consume something high in fiber, you're going to feel really full afterwards, which is good, which means you're not going to be snacking on empty kilocalorie foods like your chocolates and stuff like that. So classification, we know that this means that something has been broken down to 2 or more groups. In this case, we have 3 groups for carbohydrates, okay? This is really important to take note that there's 3 groups because students do get confused with this. So we have sugar is group 1. You'll see the way I've labeled them different colours. Starch is number 2 and 3 is fibre. Now, fibre can also be called cellulose or it can be called roughage. So if you see either of these in an exam paper, they all mean the exact same thing. So sources of sugar. These are really easy. So these are stuff up the top of the food pyramid, the stuff which we should be eating sparingly, the stuff which are not necessarily good for us in high amounts. So these are our lovely cakes, biscuits, chocolates, jams, anything lovely and sweet. Starch, these are potatoes, pasta, breads, and cereals. So if you've ever cut into a raw potato and there's like this little liquid comes out of it, that's your starch in your water. So starchy water, and it kind of like stains anything that it lands on. So that's your starch. Next up is fibre, cellulose, or roughage. So this is found in your fruit and your vegetables. So particularly you should be leaving on the skins on your apple because this is a really good source of your fibre. Brown rice, so anything that's really healthy is usually fibre. So your wholemeal pasta, your brown rice, your wholemeal bread, okay? So these are your really good sources of fibre. So as I said earlier, fibre is also known as cellulose or roughage. So here's an image here showing loads of other sources. So your nuts and seeds and lentils, your berries, loads of stuff that are really high in fibre. Now different fruits and veg have different quantities of fibre in them. So it's important to take note that the body actually does not digest or break down fibre. It actually just uses it to help you with your digestive system through peristalsis. So when you're going from your mouth to your stomach, you have the long tube called your esophagus, and basically for the food to go from the mouth to the stomach, it goes through the esophagus, and what happens is there's muscles, and it's like a muscular wave, and it's like it keeps moving down, and it basically brings the food down, and it means even if you're standing upside down, because of peristalsis, your food will still always go from your mouth to your stomach. And what happens is the fibre helps this, and it helps push the food from the mouth down to the stomach. So it is therefore really, really important in the diet of all people, whether you're a small little thing all the way up to your grandparents' age. Everybody needs fibre. So fibre helps prevent diseases such as your bowel cancer, your heart disease, and your type 2 diabetes. So it's not just about helping your digestive system. So I've seen this come up in a good few sample paper questions where they ask you about increasing fibre in the diet. It also kind of links in with CBA 2 this year. So you should be eating wholemeal bread and rice. So a good thumb rule would be to go back to the meal planning guidelines and to the food pyramid. And that will always give you some really good advice on how to increase anything in the diet. You should leave your skins on fruit and vegetables, so don't be peeling the skins off your apples. You can even eat carrots with skins on, just give them a good wash. Eat your 4 to 5 portions of fruit and veg a day, because they're going to be excellent sources of fibre. Choose nuts and seeds as snacks instead of going straight for your crisps and your chocolates. Add lentils, peas, and beans to meals. So this, I'll go back here now, and these are your lentils right here, just above the pineapple. So they are really good to put in the likes of stews and soups, and you can even put them in salads. They're really nice. So your baked beans would actually be a good source of fibre, and there'd be a good source of protein. So beans on toast would not be a bad meal. It'd be quite a good nutritionally fast meal to prepare as well. Okay, so we know that our carbs are classified into our fiber, our starches, and our sugars. So we all know what sugar looks like. It's a little crystalline. It looks like that. So many sweet foods provide empty kilocalories. So basically what this means is they lack your essential nutrients. So you're not going to be getting vitamins, minerals, proteins out of it. But it does give you a short burst of energy. So if you're ever feeling really, really tired and you go and have anything kind of sugary, it kind of gives you a sugar burst. You know how you don't give little kids loads of sweets because then they just go crazy for the next hour. This is because they lack essential nutrients. They're not actually doing anything good for you. So it's important though to note that sugar isn't just going to come up and say sugar on a food label. They can legally name them with the likes of glucose and dextrose. So these are called your hidden sugars. So even though legally they are covering themselves, the companies, a lot of the population doesn't actually realize that because they don't see the word sugar. They think, oh, this is actually very healthy for me. So anything that ends with OSE, like glucose or dextrose, that means that it is a hidden sugar. Okay, so it's really important to take note, not just for your exams, but for you, for living a healthy life. So when we have too much sugar or excess sugar, we can cause dental decay. So basically the sugar will will mix with the plaque on your teeth and it'll eat away into the enamel and you're going to get very sore teeth and you're going to have to go to the dentist. And it can also lead to obesity, and then obesity can lead to lots of other different conditions. So how to reduce our sugar intake. Now this is something you hear your teacher talking about a lot, whether it's in practicals and you're trying to make stuff slightly healthier, or in CBA 2, or in general just in all a lot of the sample papers. These kind of questions come up a lot. So look out for hidden sugars. So we remember that they usually end in OSE, so the likes of your dextrose, your sucrose. And we should always look at them on the food labels, and every food in Ireland is a legal requirement to have a food label. So you should limit your sugary treats and processed foods. So refer back to the food pyramid, eat it sparingly. So processed food is something that has gone through another step. So it's not natural. There's something that's been changed about it. So your bar of chocolate is not natural. It's come from the cocoa beans, and then it's been processed and there's been loads of other stuff added into it. Whereas your apple just come off the tree and you're just eating it straight away, so it's much better for you. Okay, use sugar alternatives. You might have seen in cafes, the latest kind of trend is to have the likes of canderel and stevia. So these are coming from plant sources. So stevia comes from actually the stevia plant, and it's from a leaf. So the canderel would usually be like a little red packet, and stevia would be a yellow one. They are actually very sweet, so you wouldn't even be putting nearly half the amount that you would usually in your tea or coffee. So you should try and choose foods which are naturally full of sugar, like your apples. So the likes of diabetics, they would be trying to be really careful of their they'd be counting their carbohydrates and their sugar content and everything, and they'd be opting for more natural sources like apples and oranges. You should always go for the water instead of soft drinks. Soft drinks are absolutely full of sugar, an unbelievable amount of sugar, which you do not need to be putting into your body. It's just going to lead to lots of different conditions. So eat less sugar. You probably heard people saying you're sweet enough already, you do not need to be adding extra sugar. Okay, so instead of adding this processed sugar, maybe go for some honey or some canderel or some stevia, or put a bit of lemon in your tea, something like that. So RDA, we'll remember, stands for recommended daily allowance. So for carbohydrates, for sugar, we should have it sparingly, so we shouldn't be having too much in our diet. Or fibre, also known as cellulose or roughage, you need 25 to 35 grams per day. Anything under that, and you could be basically, this can lead to constipation. So deficiency and overconsumption. So deficiency means, as this picture says here, you're not getting enough to support your well-being. Overconsumption means you're eating too much of something, and eating too much is never good either. So deficiency with your carbohydrates will only occur with fiber. It will not occur with starch or sugar. So if you are lacking in fiber or deficient, it can lead to constipation, bowel cancer, and type 2 diabetes. Whereas with your overconsumption, this is only with sugars, so not fiber and not starch, just sugars. It may cause obesity, type 2 diabetes, and then of course your dental disease, because you're going to be getting a lot of cavities. So as we're coming to the end of this session, I just want to show you this code here, Macro20. So this will give you 20% off standard and premium plans. So you have until basically 11:59 on Sunday, 20th of February, which is tomorrow, and it's a really nice deal there to get 20% off, and I would really recommend doing it because we have so many really useful PowerPoints on there. We have everything from the entire course. So this is just a sample of what you could be getting. So there's strand 1, which is all about your food and your cooking food and your nutrition. And then we have strand 2, which is all about the consumer and budgeting and health and well-being. And we have strand 3, which is all about the sewing. And the sewing isn't just about your CBA 1 in second year. It also comes up so far in all the sample papers. Sewing is a guaranteed. There's going to be some form of sewing question coming up, so it's a good bit to revise there. So for each topic, you will have a PowerPoint just like the ones there. You will have a resource pack with some little tips, just like the way I had done that table out. You will also get access to sample papers from that have been released, and then as the exams start to progress, we'll have past exam papers going up there. You also have quizzes which are self-correcting, so those are really useful things that can really help you improve your grade for your junior cycle now in June. So next week we have Leaving Cert French, again 11 to 12. After that, Leaving Cert Spanish, and then following that is our Leaving Cert History. So our midterm February revision courses are coming up next week, starting from Monday. So it's basically really intensive courses which students have proven to really help them. So both for Leaving Cert and junior cycle. So you get, it's a Zoom, and you have your subject specialist will be teaching it to you. They'll provide you with hints and tips and what areas you should be focusing on, and you'll get the PowerPoint slides. There'll be loads of like notes. So subjects, so for junior cycle we only offer it junior cycle home ec, but Leaving Cert there's like English, maths, biology, chemistry, physics, Spanish, and I'll show you in a minute how to get where you can find all this on the website. So the courses are only $129 per subject, which is actually very reasonable. And the fact that you can go back and relook at them is just even better. Or you can get 3 subjects for $299. So for a junior cycle, we've Spanish, we've home ec there with me on Monday, which will run from 9:30 to 2:30, and you will get a break in between. And it's only $129.99. You'll also have English and science. And with me on Monday, we will be looking at digestion and then food safety and hygiene. So food safety and hygiene has come up in all of the sample papers. Not only will this help you in preparation for your cooking mock with some useful, your cooking exam in just after the Easter holidays, it'll also help you in preparation for your actual JC exam. Digestion is one of those topics that a lot of people find hard, so I'm hopefully going to help make that seem a bit easier for people. So that'll be Monday the 21st of February. So here's my plan. So I look at the layout of the exam from 9:30 to 10, because I do think that's important and it makes the exam seem a little bit less scary. We're then going to look at human digestion, and I have sample exam questions which I will be working through with you to help you out. You're then going to have an hour of a break, to get out and have a bit of a stretch, and then we'll be straight back into food safety and hygiene. So I have food safety and hygiene 1 and 2. So this is all the microbiology end, which some people can find a little bit hard, especially if they haven't done science, but it is a really nice chapter, very interesting, and is full of life tips. So we'll also be looking at sample papers there, and of course that finishes then at 2:30. So I'm going to show you now how to find this on the website. So if you go to ExamRevision Live, you should be able to find the online February revision courses. So it's provided by subject experts, so outstanding teachers. It's live and on demand, so 1-day intensive revision courses, and you have access to them till July, which is something you don't get when you go to other places. So this is unique about us, and it's really good. You get H1 notes, so as I said, you can get one for $129.99, and hopefully I see it on Monday. And thank you for coming to this YouTube live today, and hopefully this will have helped you a lot, and best of luck now with the rest of your study for your junior cycle homework.